Hi guys, we're ready to start chapter 14, Genetics, Part 3b, if you will. And we're going to finish chapter 14 today, and then, yeah, that's where we're going. So let me get to the PowerPoint. Hope you're all doing well. And I think we are right here. We're looking at extensions of Mendel's work and our extensions of Mendelian genetics, and we've covered a few. We've covered problems with dominance and recessiveness, so things like incomplete dominance and codominance. We looked at multiple alleles. We looked at pleiotropy. Now we're going to look at epistasis. Epistasis is a situation that occurs when you're let me start over. Epistasis is when a gene at one location alters the expression of a gene at another location. So we're dealing with a situation of two genes, and one gene stands on the other gene. That's what the word epistasis means, to stand upon. One gene interferes with the expression of the other gene. One gene bugs the other gene. So they don't act independently, but they bug each other. They can interfere with each other. And it turns out there are so many different kinds of epistatic interactions, but they always involve two genes. One gene interacts with the other, or bugs, or steps on, or interferes with the action of the other. So let's take a look at an example. And we're going to see if we can figure this out in labs, Labrador retrievers. That's what that means. Black coat color, B, is dominant to chocolate coat color, little b. Okay, so we're dealing with coat color in labs. There's black labs, there's chocolate labs, there's yellow labs, right? And so a chocolate lab has to have the genotype little b, little b. A black lab has to have, oh, I need to get my pen going here a second. A black lab has to have at least one big B. A chocolate lab has to have little b, little b. Okay, but there's a second gene, BbEe, that is necessary for the formation of hair pigments of any kind. Oh. So you need, in order to be a black lab, you need to have at least one big B, and you need to have at least one big E. Because if you inherit two little e's, you're not going to make any pigments, and you're going to be yellow. In order to be chocolate, then, you have to have two little b's, but at least one big E to make pigments. Okay, so there's three different phenotypes here: chocolate, black, and yellow. Now suppose the following individuals are bred. Okay, so we've got these guys who look like they're heterozygote for both genes. This looks like a dihybrid cross. Big B, little b, big E, crossed with big B, little b, big E, little e. This looks like a normal dihybrid cross, right? What color are these animals? What are the colors of our two parents? Well, they have a big B, so that means they'll be chocolate, and they have a big, they have a big B, so they should be black. If they also inherited a big E, they did. These guys are black. We got two black labs that are mating. Now, this is what seems to be a dihybrid cross. What's the phenotypic ratio for a typical dihybrid cross? Anybody know it? You have to go back to chapter 14, part 1. When you're doing a typical dihybrid cross, don't you get a ratio that's like 9 to 3 to 3 to 1? 9/16 to 3/16 to 3/16 to 1/16. We don't have four phenotypes here. We have black, chocolate, or yellow. We don't even have four possible phenotypes. We don't have a typical 9 to 3 to 3 to 1 ratio. Something weird is going on. This is an example of epistasis. Okay? We're not going to get normal 9 to 3 to 3 to 1 ratios because we only have three phenotypes. So something weird is going on. We're going to have to sort it out. It says, what color are the breeding animals? Oh, we already figured that out, right? They're black. They have the dominant B and the dominant E. They make pigments. They make black pigments. All right. So here are our parents, our two black labs. And the next question is, what proportion of the offspring from this cross are expected to be black? What proportion are expected to be chocolate? What proportion are expected to be yellow? How do I solve this problem? This is a dihybrid cross. I guess I could make a Punnett square that's really big. In my Punnett square, I think I'm going to have a 16-box Punnett. You know? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Because each parent can make 4 different types of gametes, right? I mean, a parent could make like a big B and a big E, a big B and a little e, a little b and a big E, or a little b and a little e. And then the other parent can make the same things, and then I'm going to have to fill in all those boxes, and then I'm going to have to sort out what box represents the black phenotype. So how many boxes represent chocolate? That looks complicated. I'm going to do something easier. I'm going to do something that involves probability rules. So here's my deal. I'm going to just say to myself, what does it actually mean to be black? What genotype do you have to inherit to be black? You have to get at least one big B, and you have to get at least one big E. Can I use the rules of probability to figure out the probability of getting at least one big B from these B parents and at least one big E from these E parents? Yeah, I think I can do this. As using rules of probability, using the multiplication rule, I can sort out the probability of getting a big B, at least one big B. I guess I don't care about the other allele. And the probability of getting at least one big E. Well, this is pretty easy. I know that if I look at just the B genes, I could do a simple Punnett. That's a 4-box Punnett. It's a monohybrid cross. I really don't even have to draw. I shouldn't have to draw this all out again. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, what's the probability of getting at least one big B from these parents? Well, 3/4. What's the probability of getting at least one big E from these parents? Well, it's the same cross, 3/4. What's the probability of being black? 9/16. That sounds like the 9:3 to 3:1 ratio, but we'll see. What does it mean to be chocolate? Well, you need to have the genotype little b, little b. But what genotype do you need to have with respect to the E's? You need to have a dominant E in order to show pigments. What's the probability of getting little b, and at least one big E altogether? That would be our answer. Well, the probability of getting little b is pretty easy to figure out. That's 1/4. And we already figured out the probability of getting at least one big E. That's 3/4. What's the total probability then of being chocolate? It's 3/16. This is kind of looking like a 9:3 to 3:1 ratio, but guess what? We only have 3 phenotypes. What is the probability of having offspring that are yellow? What is the genotype for yellow? You have to inherit 2 little e's. Does it matter what you inherit at the B gene? Do you have to inherit big B's or little b's or any combination? It doesn't matter. I don't care what you get over there. If you get 2 little e's, you're going to be white. Yellow, not black, not chocolate. If you're a lab. Okay, so what's the probability of getting I don't care at the B gene? That's everything. 1. What's the probability of getting little e at the E gene? We can look at our Punnett again. 1/4. So what's the total probability of being yellow? 1/4 or 4/16. I didn't have to make my big punnet, and I'm really happy about that. This ratio is not a typical 9 to 3 to 3 to 1, is it? It's a 9 to 3 to 4. 9 to 3 to 4. Epistatic interactions always have unusual dihybrid ratios. This one happened to be 9 to 3 to 4. Some other epistatic interaction could be 15 to 1, or 12 to 4, or 9 to 7. So it really varies. Epistatic interactions, genes can interfere with each other in a whole bunch of different ways. I solved this problem without doing a big Punnett square. You could do a big Punnett square. Oh, we're not done yet. We have another problem. I better keep moving here. We're still on the same problem, it looks like. We got the same black labs that are parents. Can two, oh, no. Maybe not. Oh, maybe I don't need this. Can two chocolate labs ever produce yellow offspring? When I see a problem like this, I don't have to do a Punnett square. I just have to think of one situation that a chocolate lab can produce a yellow offspring, okay? I don't have to worry about probabilities. All I have to do is say, is this possible? So two chocolate labs. What are the genotypes of chocolate labs? Okay, two chocolate labs. Each chocolate lab has to have little b, and at least one big E. Right? Otherwise they won't have color if they don't get the big E. Can two chocolate labs ever produce yellow offspring? Well, what do you need to be yellow? You need little e. Could I get that from these parents? Yeah, you don't care about the other two genes. Yeah, I could get that. If the two parents have, each of them has one little e, I could end up with offspring that actually are homozygote recessive and are yellow. So yes, I don't care how often I get it. I'm just saying I can get it. Is it possible for these parents to ever produce black offspring? What do you need to be black? Oh, no way. Two chocolate labs can't produce a black offspring because they don't have the black allele. They don't have any big B's. So the answer for that would be no. Right? There you have it. That's an epistatic interaction problem, and I solved the problem by just following the rules. By the way, this little drawing here is in fact the dihybrid cross that we just did in our last problem. And it looks complicated. You have to spend time thinking about each genotype. You know, is this chocolate? Is this black? Is this brown? I mean, is this chocolate? Is this black? Is this yellow? We had a yellow lab. Her name was Allie. She was our paws with a cause puppy. Yeah, she's so cute. We had her last year. We raised her for a year, and then we turned her in for Paws with a Cause. And right now she's currently training for her job. We don't know what that will be. Anyway, she was adorable. I would much rather solve problems without the Punnett square that's this big, but you can use it. Okay, a couple more little topics before we're done with Chapter 14. There's another term that we should know, and that's called polygenic inheritance. Poly means many genes. Many genes contribute to one character. This is like when you've got lots of genes contributing to one phenotype. Okay? A good example of a trait that shows polygenic inheritance would certainly be height. Height in humans. And height in humans is a quantitative character, not a discrete one. You don't have just tall and short people. You have every size under the sun, right? And I love this. It says we've identified 697 common genetic variations. In other words, there are many, many, many genes that contribute to height, that lead to height, or that contribute to it. And so we would say, wow, this is a polygenic trait, okay? Or this shows polygenic inheritance. Height also depends upon things like your diet, but for now we'll go with polygenic inheritance. Here's a problem related to polygenic inheritance. In humans, 3 genes, and definitely many more, but we're going to make this simplified. 3 genes contribute to skin pigmentation. Let's call them big A, big B, big C. The dark allele for each gene, or the gene that contributes to the dark version of the allele, is dominant. Individuals who are homozygous dominant for all of these genes are darkest, and individuals who are homozygous recessive for all the alleles have the lightest skin pigmentation. We know that skin pigmentation, by the way, has a genetic component. It also has an environmental component. But we're going to stick with this real simple setup so that we can kind of think about how polygenic inheritance leads to lots of diversity. So, if individuals with the following genotypes mate, so there are individuals right there, big A, big B, big A, big B, little b, big C, little c, crossed with little a, little b, big C, little c. What is the genotype of the individual offspring with the darkest skin pigmentation from such a mating? So, if these 2 individuals mated, what is the genotype of an offspring that would have the darkest pigmentation based on our rules? You know, we got the rules up front. So you have to have as many dominant alleles as you can. Solve the problem. I think you're going to need to inherit a big A from this parent. Oh, you can only inherit the little a from that parent. A big B from parent 1. But a little b from parent 2, a big C from parent 1, and a big C from parent 2. I think that's it right there. What is the probability that the couple will have a child with this genotype? Yikes, I don't know. Okay, let's rewrite that problem. What is the probability that a couple will have a child with this genotype? So the probability of getting big A, big B, little b, big C from these parents. This could be a massive Punnett square. When we start dealing with 3 genes, or 4 genes, or 5 genes, we could have humongous Punnett squares. I don't want to do that. I want to solve this problem using 3 separate Punnett squares. I want to look at the A genes, and the B genes, and the C genes, and then I will multiply the separate probabilities together to get my answer. I think that's the easiest. Now the A gene looks something like this. We have big A crossed with little a, little a. Let's make the A Punnett. I love this Punnett square because this Punnett square is a 1-box Punnett. The only offspring from this cross are big A, little a. There is a 100% or a probability of 1. Oh, sometimes that does it. A probability of 1 that I'm going to inherit big A, little a from these parents. But you also need big B, little b. So I'm going to have to multiply my probabilities here. Oh, things are disappearing. 1 times big B, little b. Well, let's see. Here's our B parents. This Punnett square isn't too big either. So parent 1 can either donate a big B or a little b. Parent 2 can only donate a little b. I'm going to make a smaller Punnett then. That's nice. What's the probability of getting big B, little b? 1 out of 2, 1/2. What's the probability of getting big C, little c from these C parents? Hey, this is a monohybrid cross. This is our biggest Punnett for today. We fill in our monohybrid cross, or we have it memorized. What's the probability of getting big C? 1 out of 4 boxes, 1/4. What's the total probability of getting this genotype from the parents? 1 times 1/2 times 1/4, or 1/8. I love solving problems like that. I'd much rather solve my complicated multiple gene problems looking at each gene separately and multiplying the separate probabilities together. Yes. Okay. Oh yeah, just so you know, this is kind of an example of the unbelievable diversity that you can get from 2 individuals if you assume that skin color is dependent on just 3 genes, which it's dependent on more. But if you assume it's dependent on just 3 genes, and if you look at the type of offspring that can be produced from a combination of 3 genes, you can get anything from quite light to very dark. And everything in between. There's so much variation that's produced. This is a different cross from problem 10. We did not do a tri-hybrid cross. So this cross doesn't fit with our results from the last slide. The environment can play a huge role on phenotype. When we look at characteristics that are dependent on genes and environment, things like, cardiovascular health, for example. Those characters are called multifactorial because they involve genotype and your environment. All right, there's lots of characteristics that we have that are dependent upon both genes and environment, and that's no surprise. I'm going to shut down this particular discussion. We're just slimming down our topic material for chapter 14 here just a little bit. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this chapter. That leads me to a section at the very end of the chapter on human traits that follow patterns of Mendelian genetics. I want you to read these on your own and be familiar with them. If I ask you a question on a quiz or a test, I won't ask you to know how they're inherited. So if I ask you about achondroplasia, it's a type of dwarfism, I will tell you it's inherited as a dominant trait with a single gene. I won't expect you to know that. But there are lots of interesting genetically inherited diseases that are discussed, so it's totally worth reading. Okay, I want you to read those pages. There's a nice section also on genetic counseling and testing for identifying carriers of disease or people who might have a disease that is going to show up later in life, but you don't have to know that for our online quizzes. And then finally, there is a section about toward the end of the chapter that focuses on pedigrees and how you look at a pedigree and try to sort out how a trait is inherited. And I do want you to focus on that. So we have a couple more slides that I'll try to work through with you to help you sort out a pedigree and understand what it means. So here's problem 11. I guess that's what we're on for chapter 14. This is a pedigree of a family, and the trait that we're looking at here is widow's peak. Individuals who have widow's peak are colored in purple. So a widow's peak is what your hairline looks like. If your hairline comes to a point, then you have widow's peak. If your hairline is smooth at your forehead, then you don't. All right. And individuals who don't have widow's peak are in the white boxes or white circles, right? So here we've got 3 generations of a family. Grandparents, and then parents, and then 2 siblings, 2 girls here. And one of them has widow's peak, one doesn't. The question is, and here's our big question down here, is widow's peak a dominant or a recessive trait? So I'm telling you it's inherited as a single gene, and we're kind of sure that it is. Looking at this pedigree, can you tell me if it's inherited as a dominant or a recessive trait? How do you sort that out? When I look at a pedigree, I can do one of 2 things. I can just do trial and error. I can say, let me see if I can try this and say, yeah, I think widow's peak is recessive. And so any individual who inherits widow's peak will be a homozygote recessive. And I start filling in trait, and I start filling in the genotypes of any individual who has the disease based on my assumption that it's recessive. And I look for problems. So for example, if I think widow's peak is recessive, so I have little w's here for the male parent and little w's here for the female parent because they both have it, then I look at the offspring, and one of the children doesn't have widow's peak. every child should inherit little w from these parents and have widow's peak, but oops, but she doesn't. So maybe this is not recessive. Maybe it's dominant. And then I look to see if it's dominant. Can widow's peak be dominant? Well, if widow's peak is dominant, each of these parents must be at least have one big W. She must have one big W. Everybody must have one big W who has the trait, right? Can you have a child who doesn't have widow's peak if both parents have it? Yeah, sure, right? Let's put little w's in for mom and dad. And this female could inherit two little w's. She inherits at least one big W. I don't even really care what the next allele is. It doesn't matter. She can get that from her mom or dad. I think it's dominant. And I can kind of check the rest of it too. So here we've got a parent who has widow's peak up at the top with a parent who doesn't. Can you have children who get the widow's peak? Yep, because you can get the big W. Can you get children who don't have widow's peak? I guess this individual must be heterozygous. And you can sort it out. But you look for, you do a trial and error on the pedigree, or you look for a section of the pedigree that can only work in one way. This section of our pedigree tells me that this trait can't be recessive because I could not possibly have a person with no widow's peak if the trait was recessive. Let's try another one. In this case, we're looking at earlobes. Some individuals have an attached earlobe like this. Some have a hanging earlobe, much better for earrings, right? It's a loose or a free earlobe, I should say. Okay, so the question is an attached earlobe dominant or recessive? So individuals in my pedigree, this is the same family, that have the purple, they have attached earlobes. Okay? How is this inherited? Is it dominant or recessive? I look for situations in the pedigree in which it points it out to me. So I immediately saw that these two parents, the parents at top here, they don't have an attached earlobe, but they have children who have it. That to me just screams out this trait must be recessive because these individuals here, free earlobes must be recessive because these individuals don't have the trait. They're like dominant, but they have children with the trait. The only way to get that is if the trait is recessive and the parents are both carriers. The same is true of our next generation here. We got this situation happening. So I immediately can kind of spot that this trait cannot be dominant. It must be recessive. It's a little tricky to figure these out, but I think you can do it. Okay, we're back to the end. Lots of genetics problems I will be giving